recording. Hey everyone, as part of Neurogram and Mind to Mind's collaboration campaign, Epilepsy Awareness, More Than a Seizure, we have Mackenzie Wardrope here with us today. She's going to be talking about her daughter's experience living with epilepsy and her experience as a caretaker as well. So just to get us started, Mackenzie, do you want to just introduce yourself a bit, like where you're from, a bit about yourself, and your general experience or like relation to epilepsy?
Sure. So my name is Mackenzie Wardrope. My daughter Adelaide, who will be 8 in January, has SCN8A epilepsy. It's better known as acute syndrome. She had her very first seizure at 6 weeks old. We had no idea that there was anything happening with her. And she ended up just having a prolonged 45-minute seizure to the point that the doctors didn't even know what was going on. And that kind of started our journey, and through a bunch of genetic testing, we found out after 3 rounds of tests that my daughter did in fact have SCN8A. At the time, we were told that she was the 13th in the world that had been diagnosed, and there are currently approximately 450 cases of epilepsy. So we've been living in the world of epilepsy for the past 7.5 years.
So I think you've talked a little bit about what type of epilepsy. What sort of treatment are you using right now?
So right now, Addie is currently on sodium channel based drugs. So she's on Lamictal. She is on, we have started Aptium. She also is on clonazepam as a bridge while we are working on Aptium, and she does take Epidiolex as well. We had a really good run for a while with Lamictal, and then unfortunately she had a growth spurt and we kind of spiraled out of control. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with epilepsy, sometimes medications just don't work, and it is a struggle to find the right cocktail to try to do your best to get seizure freedom. And oftentimes when you have more than one drug involved, the chances of having seizure freedom are pretty limited. And that's kind of where we're at. And she has a pretty severe form of epilepsy, so it's very difficult to control, which then affects a bunch of other aspects of her life.
So I did notice actually on one of your recent Instagram posts that you're talking about like having to find those like the proper cocktails for the treatment. So I was just wondering, do you have a say in like what kind of treatments you want to use because all of them have like different side effects, and as a parent you kind of have to decide what might be best for your child? So how do you kind of go on about dealing with this and deciding?
So that's actually a really great question. It actually started from where we began in our epilepsy journey to where we are now. I have much more of a say now in the direction that we take, mostly because I didn't know that you could question doctors. I didn't know that you could question medications, and I didn't know that it was okay to say no and say, you know what, I'm not really comfortable. Give me a little bit of time to do some research on that. It also had taken us to find a team that was willing to work with us and incorporate myself as part of the team, because I am part of the team. I am the one that lives with this every single day. So a lot of the drugs and medications that you use to treat epilepsy do have an onslaught of side effects. So you're kind of toying with, do I want my kid to smile, to have no seizures, or do I want her to enjoy life and then have a handful of seizures? And well, what kind of seizures is she having now? Let's try this kind of drug, or let's try this kind of drug. And it changes all the time, because especially as children are growing, their bodies are going through so many changes to begin with. So it's difficult in a normal situation as a child's growing, but when you have all these growth spurts and hormonal changes and developments in your body, it's hard to kind of keep up with all of that. So it was important for us to find a team that was willing to really hear our concerns. Addie has been through 4 neurologists, and right now we are with a fantastic team at AI DuPont, Nemours, and Wilmington, Delaware. We had started at University of Maryland. We're not pleased with them. We went to Johns Hopkins, which was supposed to be the best of the best. And they're great for certain things, but not for Addie's specific mutation. Found a fantastic neurologist that was based out of Riley in Indianapolis, and we drove to see her, and unfortunately she passed away. And that's how we ended up landing at DuPont, and they are fantastic. So finding a team that's willing to listen to you and hear your concerns is a really important thing, which again, like I said, I didn't know that you were allowed to question when we first started, because a lot of times we trust what our doctors say. So what they're saying is, you want to believe everything that they're saying. Didn't know that you can say, you know what, I'm not really comfortable with that. So it's just finding a really good team that's so important.
All right. Also, just to go back, you mentioned that Addie had a special kind of and pretty rare mutation of epilepsy. So could you just explain a little bit about the specific type of epilepsy, how it differs from other ones?
Sure. So Addie's mutation, it's SCN8A. Again, it's known as the cute syndrome. It's much easier to remember the cute syndrome to do your Google search. It's a genetic mutation that happened de novo, which means it was new to Addie. She did not get it from myself or her father. She got it spontaneously at conception. And it's a genetic mutation in the sodium channels of her brain, and her brain does not process sodium well. So like there will be times where like there's like a flap. I'm going to try and get this as well as possible. There's like a little flap that opens that allows sodium to go through, and sometimes it'll either not close all the way or at all, and it causes seizures to happen. It is incredibly rare. A lot of people assume that it's Dravet because Dravet is SCN1A, and they do have some similarities, but they are different. And as we are learning that no two children with SCN8A are the same. And in fact, my daughter is one of two that has the exact variant of SCN8A. And even her, and we call her genetic sister, they don't even respond sometimes to the same medication the same way. So it's really tricky. There are some things in the broad spectrum, like we know SCN8A kids, generally speaking, do not respond well to Keppra, which is the go-to epilepsy medication when anybody has a seizure, because it's very benign for side effects. So all doctors will throw Keppra at you. And with our kids, it actually is detrimental to their health. So that's one thing that we did learn, but we're kind of learning with the researchers as they come along. Just to give you a little bit of background on how new this is, when Addie got her genetic testing done, the SCN8A marker was only put on the panel for genetic testing 6 months prior to her testing. So it's very new. It's a very new, newly discovered mutation that was discovered by a geneticist who actually lost his daughter, and they discovered her mutation after she had passed.
Okay, thanks for the background on that. And so now we're kind of wondering a bit, what are your biggest challenges taking care of a child with epilepsy?
There's a lot of challenges that come along with taking care of a child that has epilepsy. First of all, you are kind of always on edge. I think that with her developmental delays, this does not happen with everybody with epilepsy, but for those of us that have severely affected children, they do have other comorbidities that come with the disease. So Addie is nonverbal. She is non-ambulatory. She does not eat by mouth. She has a G tube. She is in therapies 3 to 4 times a week at school. And then outside therapy, she does physical therapy, occupational therapy. She does horse therapy. So the doctors and the appointments and stuff, that's pretty exhausting. The finding people to help is incredibly difficult. Even family, we are very limited into who is willing to help because it's such an uncomfortable thing. So people get scared of the unknown. And unfortunately, like, we can't change that. The best way to learn is to be around it and to be prepared. But a lot of people are scared of that. So a lot of people have kind of distanced themselves. So the social aspect has been difficult. It's incredibly lonely. It's exhausting mentally, physically, emotionally. And like I said, you're tired and you're on edge all the time. And I didn't know what SUDEP was until Addie was about maybe a year old. And SUDEP, for those that are not aware, is sudden unexplained death during epilepsy, which Cameron Boyce from the Disney Channel passed from SUDEP. It's there's no explanation for it. There's somebody passes during seizure, and what's difficult about that is you can't detect it in an autopsy. So there's lots of things that are unknown about that as well. So you're always on edge that every time you have a seizure, it very well could be her last. My daughter doesn't breathe a lot when she has her seizures, so you are desperately waiting for her to take that first breath. And she has desatted down to 0 before. Her seizures are so bad that PICU doctors and nurses have left the room crying after an event before. She has broken her femurs because they have been so intense. She has busted all the blood vessels in her face. So it's intense, it's lonely. Luckily, people dog on social media a lot, but luckily there's a bunch of support groups that offer support to other people that understand what you're going through. So that is one benefit, but it's lonely, it's tiring, and everybody always, I mean, here's a selfish mom thing to say. Everybody's like, you're so strong. I don't know how you do it. We do it because we have to. It's not a choice that we have. It's because it's our children, and it's hard. It's really tough.
So going back to the start of your journey, when did you first get the diagnosis?
We got it about 6 months after Addie's first seizure. So she was about 8 months old. After her first seizure had happened, they said, oh, she'll be fine. And then she had her second seizure before we had left the hospital, and they were like, your daughter has epilepsy. And I thought that was like the most outlandish thing in the world. She only had 2 seizures. How does she have epilepsy? I knew nothing about epilepsy. So they're like, you know what, we're going to do our first round of genetic testing, and just to rule anything out. So they did the first round of genetic testing while we were in the hospital, and it came back that everything was normal. Then she continued to have seizures. Like, we're going to do another round of genetic testing. They said, we did the book, so now we're going to go into the chapters. So then they went into the chapters, and everything was fine and normal. And then her seizures kept progressing and getting worse and worse, and nothing was helping. And they were like, okay, we've got one more shot, and it's an epilepsy specific panel. And that's when we had gotten our diagnosis. And I actually got it over the phone from an attending or a resident, actually. And I remember specifically, I was at my aunt's house in Brooklyn, and I got the phone call, and she goes, your daughter has SCN8A. Don't look it up, because it's nothing good will happen. Your daughter's going to have severe, and I quote, this is her quote. She said, your daughter's going to have severe mental retardation, or she's just going to die with a seizure. And then she hung up and was like, okay, thanks. And that's how we got our diagnosis. To which I did say to her also, to not label my daughter, especially when you don't know enough about a disease. And, we've defied a lot of odds to this point, but, it's still a scary thing.
For sure. So probably initially when you got the diagnosis, you probably had a lot of, questions and fears and concerns about epilepsy. How has your view on these questions and fears and concerns changed over time now that you have already experienced quite a bit?
So I would say, fortunately and unfortunately, my experience has kind of helped me understand a lot of of what happens during epilepsy. I have met a lot of people. I was very fortunate that one of my good friends from high school, he developed epilepsy in his 20s and was able to, we kind of talked about things after Addie got her diagnosis, and I was able to understand from him what actually happens to her body when she has a seizure, because he would explain to me what happens to him. And I had heard similar things, but I just needed to hear it from somebody that lived it. So really understanding and learning a lot of the process of what happens to her body, what happens, but just educating yourself, knowing that there are options. Like, nothing, just because SUDEP is a concern doesn't mean that I have to live 24/7 like in like fear of SUDEP. Like, we learn to focus on hope. And our community, and I'm pretty sure there are other communities that call them these, we focus on what we call inch stones. So a lot of our kids don't hit their milestones as well as other children. So for example, my daughter was not able to sit up on her own until she was over a year old. And then she would have a bad bout of seizures and then completely lose head control. So we were like back to like one step forward, three steps back. So we always try to focus on hope. And you know what, like, if we got here once, we can do it again. And through the years, I have been able to help other friends of mine who have had experiences with their children, knowing what questions to ask when you're in the hospital, knowing what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what tests you should be asking for, saying, you know, hey, if we're on this medication, let's go ahead and check blood levels and follow that, as opposed to, like, with our children, they metabolize drugs really quickly. So their medication levels are really, really high because they metabolize through them really quickly. They tend to drop, their levels drop. So I have learned it's okay to push and say, you know what, we need to do this higher. But while we do this, let's go ahead and check blood levels and see where they're at with that. Knowing what, like, the ketogenic diet works great for some epilepsies, doesn't work great for others, or CBD oil works great for some epilepsies, doesn't work great for others. And knowing that epilepsy is a hurry up and wait. Nothing is fast with epilepsy ever, like trying to figure out medications. You just have to have a lot of patience, and it's hard, but it's taught me patience and appreciation and to be grateful. And truthfully, it's taught me how to love even deeper, because things that we don't think about and things that we take for granted. I watch my daughter and all these other amazing humans with epilepsy struggle quite often. And it just makes me appreciate how much harder they have to work for things. There's so many things that come with epilepsy. I feel like I've even scratched the surface, but yes.
It's a beautiful thing that you said, that it makes you appreciate life even more.
Mm-hmm.
So at the start
Yeah.
of things, you mentioned a little bit about how the social aspect around epilepsy is also really hard. So how has the stigma around epilepsy affected your family?
We tend to not really go anywhere. We don't get invited to as many things as we once did. Over the course of time, when you have to say no so many times, people just assume that you're always going to say no. So you don't get invited. And like I said, people get scared, so they don't want to be around Addie when she has a seizure. It can be a scary thing, but the more you're around it, the more you're like, okay, this is what I can expect. But we don't get to go much of anywhere. One of Addie's greatest joys is to be in the car and go for drives, because she gets to see a different change of scene. Of course, it's a little bit of a struggle lately because of like gas and everything, but we're very limited in what we can do and where we can go and the kind of things that we can experience. She's never been on a plane. She also developed neutropenia from one of her medications. So she is not really able to go on a plane because neutropenia means that she pretty much has no immune system. A lot of people that go through chemo end up with neutropenia because it kills their neutrophils. That happened with Addie with one of her medications, and we just have never recovered from it. So it means she's more prone to infections, and cold and flu season, we're pretty much on lock and key. So oddly, with the whole COVID thing, it kind of was like our extended version of our winters because we already didn't go out anywhere. So we're just kind of limited on where we can go and who really wants to be around her. So we tend to stick with people that know and love her for her and don't judge her for her seizures, and other parents and families that experience what we experience.
Yeah, so another question that we have is, there are possibly people who are watching this video and going through the same experiences that you're going through, or maybe are like kind of in the position where they have just, received some kind of diagnosis for their loved one with epilepsy. So do you have any sort of advice for these people who are also taking care of loved ones with epilepsy?
Yeah, know that it's okay to ask for help, and try as best as you can to prepare for the marathon and not the sprint. It's really easy to go gung-ho and you're really excited, like I'm going to do all this research and I'm going to do all these runs and I'm going to do as much awareness as I possibly can and like go. But just know, like, it's okay to take your time and process things. It's okay. It's really okay. And it's really important to ask for help. It's important to talk to people that understand. If you don't have somebody that understands, seek therapy or counseling to talk it out. There's such a stigma that goes along with that. It's really okay to talk about things and try to. I always encourage people to try and find others that experience things that they are going through. So if you know somebody that's going through epilepsy, not even specifically your specific diagnosis of epilepsy, but if you know anybody, or even it doesn't even have to be epilepsy, like any medical challenges, talk with them. But again, like, just prepare yourself that it's a long-term thing. It's not a short-term thing, and it's mentally exhausting. It's difficult, but it's doable. And it's okay to celebrate the little things, the inch stones. You made it a week seizure free. That is awesome. And you celebrate that. Did you get kicked down and have a seizure that week? You know what? That kind of sucks, but it's okay. We're going to get back up and you can keep pushing forward. And if you're having a day where all you want to do is cry and scream and curse everyone, do it. You do what you need to do to make yourself feel better. I encourage everybody to go outside and get fresh air as much as possible. Literally and figuratively, fresh air is important.
So what can we do as individuals or anyone else watching to really help with epilepsy awareness?
Talk about it. Ask questions. Epilepsy is the fourth most diagnosed brain disorder that is out there. It's more than MS and Alzheimer's combined. And everybody knows about Alzheimer's, everybody knows about MS, but not many people know about epilepsy. And 1 in 100 people will have epilepsy, have a seizure in their life, and 1 in 26 will develop epilepsy. I mean, this is actually a lot more common than people are willing to talk about. And I think it's because there's so many unknowns in epilepsy and there's so much research to be done. The brain is a really challenging thing to learn. So what's important is that you keep the conversation going, and also educate yourself. Even if you don't know somebody specific that has epilepsy, please go out there and understand epilepsy safety, so that if you're in a situation where somebody has a seizure, you cushion their head, put them on their side so that they're not aspirating, time the seizure and talk to them calmly and make sure that they know that you're there and they're not alone. You stick with them until the seizure is done. If it's not ending, you call 911. If you don't know the person, you call 911. It's just important to be as educated as possible and to help fundraise, because we need it. This is something that's going to affect much like cancer, this is going to end up affecting everybody in one way or another.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie, for giving us so much of your time today. We really appreciate you sharing our experience with us and all of our viewers.
Thank you so much for having me. And for more information, please check out thecutesyndrome.com and epilepsy.com. And you can always find me at the original Kenz if you have questions.